Hi, everyone. Welcome to the International and Defense Policy Speaker Series. I'm Stephanie Van Hlatke, the director of the CIDP at Queen's University. We have a very exciting talk today. Exciting for two reasons, because it features our CDSN postdoctoral fellow at the center, Dr. Joanna Massé, but because also she'll focus on the ethics and experiences from the field. And if you are doing field work or are planning on doing field work during the last year and a half, you probably cannot wait to get back out there to do your research. But let's face it, when you have not done something in a while, it's worth brushing up on your skills. And today is a good opportunity to have these kinds of conversations together. Dr. Massé has spent a lot of time teaching and thinking about the ethical dimensions of research, including in the field. I do encourage you to reach out to Dr. Massé after today to chat about this topic or about her ongoing postdoctoral work, which focuses on gendered stereotypes faced by women in combat units. But for today, Dr. Massé will talk about ethics in fieldwork through the prism of her doctoral research, which she carried out at Université Laval. And her doctoral work was on women's activism during violent conflicts. I'll also post her full bio in the chat box shortly, and you'll also find her email on that page. Joanna, the floor is yours, and I will be back with you on screen after your presentation to help moderate the Q&A until 1 p.m. Thank you very much for preparing this talk for us.
So yes, first I want to begin by acknowledging that Queen's is situated on the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory. I am grateful to live here as an invited guest upon the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and Anishinaabe Nation. I'm also grateful to be here with you today to talk, well, not about what I'm working on as part of my postdoctoral project, but maybe next time, but what, as Stephanie said, what I learned about ethics during my doctoral research. Let's begin by saying that talking about ethics can be sometimes intimidating, especially for young social scientists using qualitative methods. After all, ethics in research is about following the principle that good research is made of, and we don't have years of experience behind us. Moreover, we most of the time have a strong case of imposter syndrome. No doubt, it's something that we all strive for, and rightly so. What's the point of doing research if it's not done right? And it seems pretty straightforward when you read about it in manuals. Do not do harms, respect for people, concern for people's well-being. And then you begin the research process. And for the one in Canada, it means gaining the approval from your university research ethics board. But let's be honest, in my opinion, at least, it doesn't really prepare you for the complexity of the ethical journey you embarked upon, and the reality of the ethical dilemma that you may encounter during your data collection and even after. So yes, as part of my doctoral thesis, doctoral research, I worked on women activism during political conflict. I went twice in Northern Ireland for 3 months in total, and a bit more, and twice in Palestine for 6 weeks, so it was shorter. I went there with the idea of analyzing the radicalization process of women during the Trouble for Northern Ireland, so between 1968 to 1998, Northern Ireland, and from the beginning of the occupation in 1967, from the aftermath to the Oslo Conference for Palestine. But I got so much more than I initially thought. People sharing personal experience, especially about difficult situation and event, is a very humbling experience for a researcher. You learn about others, but you also learn about yourself, about what you want to do, about what are your limits, and what kind of person and researcher you want to be. Because ethics is not only about how you treat others, it's also about yourself, and allowing myself to be reflexive about my own positionality and to be reflexive about my feelings and emotion and how they might influence my action, and so the action of other. It really helped me to better understand the experience of other. It didn't happen overnight. It began from the beginning that I was writing my research proposal, and it's not yet finished. But yeah, so during this presentation, I will go back on this ethical journey, this awakening. I hope it won't be too boring, and that you can understand what I'm saying despite my French accent and my pronunciation. And maybe it will help students and young researchers about their own research. So let's see. I will organize this today's talk in 4 parts, as you can see. And let's begin with, for me, the beginning, which was the ethic board. Let's be honest, when it comes to ethics and methodology in general, I've come a long way because, in fact, I never heard about ethics before entering my PhD program. Maybe because I didn't have any methodological course before, but yeah, at this point, ethics were only mentioned in relation with the research ethic board approval, which was needed for my research. So because of the sensitive nature of the topic I was interested in, my supervisor warned me early on that it may be long and it may be frustrating at some point, but being herself well-versed in dealing with such topics, she gave me useful tips and models about how to formulate the many forms that were asked by the ethics board. And when I say many, I mean many, because at this point, I was thinking about doing a third fieldwork in the Basque Country, which meant possibly doing interview in Spanish with the help of a translator. So in total, I had about, I think, more than 30 documents in my application folder. And beside my research project, which was 56 pages long. So yes, coming from the French educational system, it was the first time I learned about the ethics board existence, and with the exception of few modification and clarification, it went pretty smoothly. Some of the remarks were very relevant, although less so. But at no point I had to really think about what ethics meant. I mean, beyond the abstract. I never had any training. I never took a course about it. There was no TCPS2 core for me, which we do Queen's, or anything like that. And so I did this step of going in front of the ethical committee in a very kind of mechanical way. I didn't take the opportunity to really think about the moral and ethical implication of my research. Yes, I knew I had to do my best to guarantee and to protect and guarantee the well-being of my participants. But beyond that, it was fuzzy. Even what it meant and what it entailed was confusing, because at this point, I never been once in Northern Ireland or Palestine, and so I didn't know what it meant there, what it meant guarantees the well-being of my participants, and never once at this step we talk about anything was said about advice for the researcher. Yes, researchers have to protect their participants, but what about themselves? So yes, I got tips and advice from my supervisor, but I realized I was pretty out of my depth when I landed in Belfast, and then after that in Tel Aviv. And I think, as pretty much every early researcher can attest, and I hope, and I say early researcher because I hope at some point it will go away, but imposter syndrome is a real thing. My doctoral fieldwork was my first fieldwork, and for most of it, it was the first time I did interview. And I think we can all agree when it comes to human beings and human interaction, nothing is ever easy. So I learned pretty quickly on the field, and I will talk about it later. Getting access and so getting accepted is not as easy as you may read about it in manuals. There are different reasons to it, but one of them, in my opinion, is that you have to learn how to present yourself and present your research to people. That means being clear about what you are and what you want to do, even if that can change over time. But once again, saying it like this, it's easy and straightforward. And at this point of your research, you explain again and again what your research is about. But up to this point, it was mostly in a research academic setting. So you talked about it with colleagues, or maybe your family and friends, and doing it in front of a stranger, especially once you need something from, is intimidating, especially the first few times. You're unsure, you lack confidence, and for me it was, I think it was because I had difficulty to set aside my identity as a student to claim one as a researcher. There was no use in my research for concealment and deception, and I was clear about who I was and what I wanted to do. That being said, how you present yourself, what you choose to highlight during an interaction is crucial. And that's why from the beginning of your research, you need to be reflexive about your positionality, even before fieldwork. I mean, knowing what can what you can use in your favor and what is negative is essential, because we are not all equal in the field, depending on the context and what you're studying, what you are studying. As a woman, I think it was easier for me to work on women experiences. Not that it meant an automatic trust from my participants, but it helped people make sense about why I thought gender was an important dimension. As a foreigner and a doctoral researcher, I think people were more inclined to take the time to explain how it was and give me advice about my research, which sometimes can be feel pretty patronizing, but most of the time it was really useful, both. Because when someone explains the truth, how someone explains the truth is often directly influenced by their own experiences. So it's useful for me. And being French and from a Canadian university, I think people felt that that I can be unbiased and rallied to their point of view. So yes, and the fact that I went personally to Northern Ireland and Palestine was seen as a proof that I was really interested into hearing their story, that I had a real interest for their situation, especially in Palestine. in the West Bank, because I only went in the West Bank. I forgot to tell you. But yes, being reflexive about who I am is also what allows me to see my potential own shortcoming. For instance, and that happened to me in Northern Ireland, I consider myself like someone pretty well versed in the terrorist and in the terrorism and radicalization field. And what happened at the beginning of my fieldwork in Belfast, I met this one participant, and she was categorical about the fact that we cannot talk about terrorism when it comes to the trouble. That was war, pure and simple, no question asked. And I didn't answer her, I mean, not really, but I didn't agree with it. And I remember feeling righteous about it. I mean, I knew what I was talking about, and me and the whole thing, a whole field of researcher. But I didn't think much of it at right then. But over time, I keep thinking about it, and it wasn't about one of us being right and the other wrong. Language, at this point, I didn't for much about the power of language, but language is very important, especially in Northern Ireland. And this is why when you are Republican, you talked about Derry and not Londonderry. You even prefer to use the north of Ireland or the sixth county instead of Northern Ireland. So yes, I can be critical about the fact about how terrorism is conceptualized and how it is too often politicized, even by researchers themselves. But it doesn't change the fact that there is a moral judgment when it comes to terrorism. And who am I to deny this woman the right to deny the terrorist brand that the Republican woman was accused of? Who am I to say that Northern Ireland is not a case of occupation, because Ireland wasn't really a British colony? That's not my, I mean, my opinion have no place in here. And as a researcher, I need to understand why my participant thinks so I can begin to really understand our experiences. I mean, there's no place for my ego, so yeah. Finally, being reflexive also helps you to understand why you choose the topic, what attracted you to this topic, and also the way you can be biased regarding it. So yes, as I said earlier, when I began to work on my doctoral research, I've never been to either Northern Ireland or Palestine. I knew no one from this place. I had no contact there. Before going to the field, I hadn't identified some people and organization I thought might help me once in the field. For the one I've been able to get contact information, I sent an email, and the recruitment notice, the Ethic Research Board asked me to prepare for my application. And I've got almost no answer at all. I also tried to contact academics from there, which was a dead end for Northern Ireland. But in Palestine, it helped me a little bit to get in touch with some women involved in women's group. But in comparison and contrary to what I expected, getting access in Northern Ireland was much more difficult than it was in the West Bank. Naively, I thought Northern Ireland, at this point, still in the European Union, and they speak English, and I somewhat speak English, and the trouble ended 15 years ago. So I thought it was a pretty beginning, and that I can really, do something with this field work. I didn't take into account that many people were sick about being asked again and again about what happened during the trouble, asked the same question by journalists and academics. I didn't take into account that there was still a lot of tension and frustration on both sides. Everyone I've met was very happy about the fact that the wars of violence was behind them. But some of them, for some of them, the conflict never ended, and it was just a new form, and it won't. For them, the conflict won't come to an end until Ireland is reunified. So it was very different from what I thought. And moreover, getting people to talk in Northern Ireland is potentially dangerous for them, as one participant made me aware of at the beginning of my fieldwork. I was never interested about knowing specific action the women I've met were involved into, and maybe the type of action in kind of a very general way, but not what action specifically, not factual information. But I learned that that people acknowledging that they took part in criminal action in the past or having linked with the IRA. Link is in a wide range kind of way, linked with the IRA, and if they weren't imprisoned for that, they could still be charged for it today. But if they had been in prison for that, and released then with the term of the Good Friday Agreement, they could talk about it, about their experience. But if it was something that they weren't specifically charged with, even if it was non-violent, they were taking the risk to get back to prison. So yes, it was very important because a few years ago, it's still going on, but some ex-IRA member had accepted to talk with researchers about their experience as part of a project of oral archive, and they signed a confidentiality agreement, and the testimony would not be made public until they were dead. But the British government learned about it and subpoenaed, I don't know how to pronounce it, but subpoenaed it as a researcher. And there was this big judicial battle, which is still going on. But yes, even if it made people think twice about sharing their experience, even if they didn't have anything to be afraid of. Of course, it's not the case for everyone, and some participants didn't see the need for anonymity. But it was important for me to treat everyone equally, and that means that no one was being identified in my interview. But this affair, what is known as the Boston Tapes affair or the Boston College affair, made me change a little bit the focus of my research by looking at politicization in the politicization process of women in a more wide-ranging kind of way. As for Palestine, the situation is very different. as they are still living a situation of occupation and oppression, and violence never ended. The feeling of being forgotten and the frustration that goes with it is prevalent. But in paradoxically, people were much more open to talk with me about their experience, to share their story. I think also because my research is about the beginning of the occupation until the end of the first Intifada, which is time most Palestinians are kind of nostalgic about it. It was a golden age, and I mean, full of hope for the future at this point. So they were, I mean, they liked to talk about it, and I think because it was this time and not what came after with the second Intifada and its bloodiness. So people were inclined to share their story. But the problem is I don't speak Arabic. And when I began, I wasn't sure I will be able to do anything on with this field work. So I tried to do some kind of pre-field work to see it was doable, if I can get access, even if I didn't speak Arabic. And that meant that I had to find gatekeepers, that mean people that can help me get in touch with activist women from this time. And yes, that's when it was a question of luck for me. I have to say it, because I was able to get in touch with someone because I met a lawyer in Northern Ireland, which had a family member which was working with humanitarian workers in Palestine. And if I haven't asked, do you know someone who can help me with this research, I'm not sure I would have been able to do my fieldwork in Palestine, in West Bank. So even if I was prepared, it was kind of luck, I have to say it. I mean, I was also able to get in touch with an academic contact at the Bethlehem University, and I got a gatekeeper there. But yes, it was luck, I have to say it. And yes, for me, confidentiality and anonymity was very important. I think sometimes more for me than it was for my participants. But learning from my Northern Ireland experience, everything was done verbally in accordance with my ethic approbation, but I learned from what I've done before. So yes, for the last part of this presentation, objectivity, big question, because I mean, I really learned about research and methodological during my PhD, but I wasn't really comfortable with how I was taught to do it from the very beginning. It was all about the positivist epistemology and the hypothetical deductive reasoning, and which was presented as the way to go if you want to do a real scientific research. And one of the most important tenets of positivism is that the objectivity of the researcher is crucial. You must be factual, you must be unbiased, and emotion and impression have no place in a scientific endeavor. And for me, it didn't make sense, because as human beings, studying other human beings and behavior, it was impossible. And that's not to say that being objective should not be the objective. It is, but it's not by taking myself out of the equation, and that I can be objective about what I hear and what I see. Me being there, the way I'm formulating the question I ask, the way the people I choose to meet, all of that potentially change the equation. And that's why consciousness of my positionality is again central, because if I'm aware of potential bias in my perspective or in my process, I can work toward limited its effect. During my fieldwork, and especially at the beginning, I was constantly afraid of not being objective. That's why I wanted initially to include more comparison. For instance, analyzing loyalist women's experiences beside the Republican women's experiences, or Israeli women experiences beside the Palestinian ones. But it didn't appear, it appeared too difficult because I didn't have the time to do it. And but the fact that I choose to concentrate on a Republican and Palestinian experience, didn't it betray a bias in myself? The question of objectivity was at the center of many doubts relating to the value of my analysis, and long before after my fieldwork. And I also tried to be more neutral, the more neutral possible during my interview, to not express personal opinion, and I mostly did. But it's normal for participants to seek validation from the researcher when it comes to their experience, especially traumatic one. In such situation, being purely neutral is difficult, and I would say in some occasion even cruel, because as I said, participants seek validation, and I have to say I don't think I was properly prepared to manage the overflow of emotion that come from this experience. I mean, not every participant, but a couple of participants were difficult, and crying especially was difficult. Of course, when it came to this level of emotions, I stopped the interview right away. And even before that, when I felt that the participant was getting emotional, I tried to change the subject and get another topic more, lighter. But it wasn't always. But I didn't. It wasn't always effective, and this type of interview were particularly draining. But of course, I didn't let anything show. But one of the way I learned how to manage it was for me to talk about it later on, not about the interview and not what about the participant told me, because it was confidential, but talking about colleagues and friends, about what I felt during this experience, and once again being reflexive about it helped me to better understand my experience, my reaction to it, so I could be more objective about what was said during this time. But yes, I learned that when it comes to sensitive topics, it is sometimes necessary to take the time to distance yourself from the topic. After my data collection, I took a long time before being able to analyze it. It allowed me to come back to my data with fresh eyes, but yes, it's not always possible depending on your circumstance. To conclude, I mean, ethics can mean a lot of things to different people, and as a well-used quote, it's not the destination, it's the journey. I think we can learn a lot by sharing the moral question and the ethical dilemma we meet during doing our research. I mean, go behind the curtain, if I can say. Each situation is different, but it's by showing that no research is perfect and no researcher is all-knowing that we can begin a dialogue and maybe improve the next research. So yeah, that's it. I think I'm good on the time, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanna. Some fascinating stories that you shared with us. And I think what struck me particularly is this, first of all, this counterintuitive point you made about expectations you have about which fieldwork will be maybe easier than another setting. And then sometimes you learn that a particular field is way more challenging than you initially expected for reasons that weren't immediately visible to you. And also this point you made about the impossibility of being neutral when you're interviewing people. And at the end of the day, I think, that the setting isn't neutral, emotions come to the fore, and you come to these interviews with your own biases. So this point about reflexivity, I think, matters on many different levels, and you've made all of those clear for us today. I have a few questions for you, or maybe some more challenges that we might face in this journey of ethics and reflexivity. And one of them is with regards to how then all of this thought process and all those considerations get featured into your publications and the final outputs of your work, because I think there's a growing call for being more transparent about some of these limitations, challenges, and overall ethics design of your research. So I'm wondering, how have you approached this in your work, whether it's an article, whether it's a policy brief, whether it's a book manuscript? How do you approach this? I'll start there. I won't get too much ahead of myself, but I'll launch that first question off to see how you deal with that.
Yes, I mean, that's an excellent question, and it's very true. I think we've seen in the last decade more and more interest for this, for people, for researchers to be more open about this ethic that we didn't talk about it earlier. I mean, that's behind the curtain, as I said, but now, I mean, for myself, I think it's very important, especially for students and young researchers, because we are lost. In my opinion, I was lost in the field, and I think, yes, it's kind of a passage obligé, something that you need to get through. But if we talk about it more and more, we can help to prepare and students to be more adaptive and flexible when they go to the field. But there's more and more journals that publish articles about it, and I will be very interested to kind of publish what I've done here, to deepen what I've done here and publish it. I think maybe you need to have more experience and to do several field work in order to do a book. But it would be very interesting because, as I said, ethics for me is not about a destination, because in each context, in each field work is different. And it's more about gaining the capability to be adaptive and to think about all the ramifications in specific type of situation that it is about and what is interesting about it. So yeah, I think I'm for more sharing between researchers about it, because we can learn about it, and I think at all kind of point of your career, from students, from experiences researcher. We can learn a lot from each fieldwork.
Thank you so much. I found myself in my last project describing the feeling in the room. So the body language, the way people were positioned, some of the faces that they made that convey some of the meaning that is not readily available in their answer. I think it also helps put the reader, in the context of those conversations. But it felt almost like creative writing at times when you're trying to describe exactly the feeling in the room and people's attitudes. Yeah, please.
But because for years, for years we were taught that it's not about yourself, and if you're talking too much about your own perspective, it's not scientific and it's just a narcissism. And I think we see that, bias is a thing of life, and so we need to acknowledge them in order to limit their impact. And but we still feel it's still difficult to share what we think is our own perspective and our emotion, even if it's helpful for other people.
I think that's entirely right. And as you gain experience, or maybe as you gain professional confidence, you do feel a bit more risk acceptant about the types of writing style that can, help your reader peek behind the curtain. But I think when you're writing a doctoral dissertation, you're thinking so much about the academic expectations, and you're necessarily a bit more rigid in your writing style, and you haven't necessarily found that voice, or at least it was certainly the case for me. But I think these conversations about emotions, about vulnerabilities, about biases in the context of fieldwork are helping maybe remove some of these taboos about going beyond the rigid academic discussion of the research, and helping to cultivate a culture of openness, to cultivate more openness in the writing process, certainly, so that these insights are shared with your reader and your broader scholarly community. Speaking of scholarly community, Joanna, I do have a question about what we can do to improve as educators, as research institutions as well. So I'm thinking now about our experiences with formal methods training, because there is some of that in doctoral or graduate programs where we talk about the range of quantitative and qualitative tools that can support research design. And then there are, professional development opportunities out there that could better support our students in carrying out fieldwork in demanding or complex environments. So I'd like to hear you perhaps on whether you have any suggestions for curriculum improvement overall, best practices that might or should be shared across the board, or perhaps any tips on professional development for graduate students who may be wondering, you mentioned about this feeling of being lost sometimes when you undertake a program, but to help them feel less lost as they dive into the empirical component of their work. So anything at all that we can do as educators to improve curriculum, or anything that, a center like ours, the CIDP, could provide in terms of better professional development opportunities to help prepare emerging scholars as they go out on the field.
I, as a latecomer in the methodological field, I found it wonderful, because there was so much different type of method, and depending on your ontology and epistemology, and that you may feel attracted to. But I think the problem with how we teaching methodology is that we are still in one teacher, one course kind of mind. So it's one teacher which has its own perspective, because even if we know about the other type of epistemology and methodology and methods, we are expert in one or twice, one or two, sorry, one or two. So I think if we really want to improve how we are doing this, it's by collegiality. And instead of having one methodological course taught by one teacher, ask your department and the other professor, because everyone is different and everyone has during their career got to be expert in something a little bit different from the other one. So we can learn a lot, even in our own department, from other. And do not be afraid to ask people from other departments. We can learn a lot from anthropology and sociology and other. I mean, I'm biased. I love sociology and anthropology, but in my case, I thought. I mean, most of my department, I feel, was very positivist and very quantitative. So even as a qualitativist, I felt in the minority, which in my case made me become very militant about my qualitative identity. But once again, it's by sharing our experience and getting maybe a network of researchers to talk about all the different possibilities in methodology and for fieldwork also, for sharing and be open about the fact that there is no one way, there is no perfect way, and we just have to do our best when we are researching, because it's like when you're writing your thesis, it's not about perfection, it's about getting it done.
That's a very important point. I think the old adage, a good dissertation is a done dissertation, and there's no such thing as a perfect dissertation. It's always a good reminder to have in our mind. I think for a bit of a parting question, and I hope it's fair game, because you've not completed your postdoctoral project yet, and I know that you've been working a lot on the ethics side of your postdoctoral project. But I want to ask this question because I know it resonates a lot with our audience, CIDP fellows and students, and that's doing research with the military. And I'm wondering if there are any unique considerations, either in terms of ethics or reflexivity, that you would like to share with us in terms of either approaching military stakeholders or special ethical considerations that you've come across as you've designed your postdoctoral project, which deals with women in combat units.
So what I'm learning right now is that working with and on the military is very different, and it's difficult. And but I think it's very interesting because as a community, they have their own ethical research board, which come after the university research board. And so it's a long administrative and heavy administrative process, but I mean, right, it's right, they are right to protect their interest as a community. And I mean, I think it was paradoxal that it was easier for me to get into the West Bank than to begin my research with the Canadian military. I think it's funny. It's very funny, but it's very interesting. I think it should be more. We should talk about it more, because when I began, I knew nothing about what it was, and the information I found on the internet, there wasn't much about how it worked, and it's. The military ethic board, they are very friendly and they are very helpful, but we don't hear much from them if we don't contact them. So I thought it was really interesting because for me, it's a whole new world. And it's interesting for me to see a community, the military community, how they protect their interests, and which once again it's their right. But as a researcher, it's a little frustrating because I want to begin right now. But it has the advantage to make, I mean, I take the time, I have the time to do my review literature, to be good with everything that is theoretical. So when it will begin, I will be ready. But yes, you have to sometimes take the time for this kind of research.
I have to say, from my own experience, I have benefited immensely from having visiting defense fellows embedded within the CIDP environment, because sometimes it's just a matter of language or vocabulary to get through individuals who have such a different professional culture than your own. And so to convey the clarity of your question, it is really helpful to be able to validate certain questions, how they are framed. And sometimes questions you don't think will be prickly or will elicit a defensive reactions may. So being able to share your interview questionnaire or practice interviews, or just, talk a bit about it beforehand with some military practitioners that you know or are directly in your environment, which is the case with our VDFs, for me has been incredibly helpful, and certainly help boost my confidence in terms of starting these interviews and going into that room for the very first one. And of course, the first one is never as good as the last one. As you practice and you refine your questions and you get more comfortable with your subject matter over time. But thank you so much for this advice. Thank you for your insights in your presentation. And I look forward to seeing how your postdoctoral research evolves. Thank you for sharing your contact information here in case anyone has follow-up questions. And I'm very happy that you were able to take the time to participate in our CIDP speaker series. Thank you so much, Joanna, and stay safe.